Well, welcome everyone. I can't tell you what a thrill it is for me to be here and what a privilege it is to have been invited by Sally to come and speak at her conference. I've been following her work for about 10 years now, and fortunately she helped me overcome my fear of eating red meat and eggs and butter and so on, so I was able to carry on in terms of my own wellness path. I call this talk How to Fix a Broken Brain because that's essentially how I felt for many, many years of my life. I had debilitating chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, multiple chemical sensitivities through basically the 80s and 90s in particular. And I wish I knew then what I know now. The way that I can describe the way my brain felt, indeed, was that it was broken. I was walking around in an absolute brain fog. I had absolutely no memory. At that stage, I had had 2 university degrees. I couldn't read a sentence on a book. I'd read that sentence over and over and over again. I could not remember what I was reading, and this was in my 20s. So I knew something was terribly wrong. A catalyst for me was that I had a terrible infection. I was living overseas at the time. I lived a year in France, a year in England, and the latter 6 months of my stay over there, I was living in a moldy apartment with black mold growing everywhere on the walls, in my clothes, and I was just very naive. I didn't understand how toxic black mold was. And after 6 months in that apartment, I absolutely collapsed. And basically stayed sick from there on in for many, many years. So I think really ultimately my major symptom was debilitating fatigue. I also had extremely debilitating insomnia. I can tell you for that 12 years I may have slept about 6 hours a week in some instances. I was not sleeping at all. I didn't understand what was wrong with me. And I was tenacious. I kept looking and looking and looking for answers. I was not going to give up. And I said to myself, come hell or high water, I'm going to find answers for people because nobody deserves to live like this. Nobody.
He is often referred to as the coconut guru, and many respectfully call him Dr. Coconut. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Bruce Fife.
1 in 8 people over 65 have Alzheimer's, and as many as half of those over 85 have Alzheimer's. And most cases of Alzheimer's occurs after the age of 60, but in some cases it can occur in a person's 40s or 50s. This is called early onset Alzheimer's. You know, it's bad enough to get Alzheimer's in old age, but to get it in midlife is really devastating. Of the 3.5 million people in America who have Alzheimer's, 500,000 of them have early onset Alzheimer's, and another 600,000 have mild cognitive impairment, which is a precursor to Alzheimer's. As you age, your risk of Alzheimer's increases. So the older you live, the more likely, bigger the chance you're going to get Alzheimer's. But age does not cause Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's isn't a part of the normal aging process. Alzheimer's is a disease just like diabetes or cancer. The brains of Alzheimer's patients are much different from the brains of elderly people who age normally. In an Alzheimer's brain, there is a high degree of degeneration and damage. You know, as we get older, our bodies aren't quite as spry as they were when we were younger. Our muscles aren't as strong, our bones aren't as strong, our minds may not be as sharp. So mild lapses of memory do not indicate Alzheimer's.
And I thought the conference was about magnesium and behavior, and part of it is, but I know I'm on the nutrition track, but it was a bit of a shock, to find out I was the last speaker on the last day when everybody had their suitcases behind them and were running out the door. But then I realized what a bonus, because I was able to sit in on Sally's lectures on Friday and then view the other lectures and go online and read about what people were talking about at the conference if I couldn't attend the conference. So I began to see that I could help do an overview and kind of put magnesium into perspective in the Weston A. Price model. So with behavior, just to, kind of glance over it a bit, without magnesium, you have all these bad behaviors. And I'll get into the reasons why, but it is so important for behavior. We started realizing that using Epsom salts for children, for autistic children. Just putting them in a bath. I mean, kids have to have a bath, right? So you put a cup or two of Epsom salts in their bath, and lo and behold, their constipation issues clear up. They start sleeping. They start getting less irritable and cranky. It really helps them on so many levels. And it's just not muscle relaxation. You'll see as I go through that magnesium is working on thousands, even tens of thousands of biological systems in the body. So when you make minerals in the body, it's impossible. You just can't do it. What happens with these essential cofactors of certain vitamins and minerals is that the body has to have it from the foods, and then it has to absorb properly. And as we know from the activator factors of vitamin A and D, they're required for absorption. So all these things work together.
So the German philosopher Goethe once said that everything has been thought of before, and the challenge is to think of it again. So the coexistence of chronic skin disorders and mental health conditions has been recognized for a long time, both in popular culture and the scientific literature. And the notion that changes in gut function are connected to inflammatory skin conditions is also not new, nor is the idea that the function of the gut and the brain are intertwined. These ideas have actually been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. More than 2,000 years ago, Hippocrates famously said that all disease begins in the gut. The gut-brain connection is deeply rooted in our language with sayings like, I have a gut feeling, or listen to your gut. In the late 1800s, researchers developed the concept that we feel anxious because of stress-induced stimuli like butterflies in our stomach. And they believe that our emotions are heavily influenced by the nerves present in our gut. Other early researchers believe that constipation was the rule rather than the exception in cases of acne. Now, two of the most visionary pioneers in this area were John Stokes and Donald Pillsbury, who were at Duke Medical School from the late 1920s, I think, through the 1930s. And they presented a unified theory of the gut-brain-skin axis in 1930. They connected emotional states like anxiety and depression to changes in the gut flora, which they theorized promotes both local and systemic inflammation. And they observed, and I quote here, an important linkage with cutaneous outbreaks of erythema, urticaria, and dermatitis, all of which are skin conditions, by way of the physiology and bacteriology of the gastrointestinal tract. They cited research suggesting that 40% of those with acne had low levels of stomach acid, and they suggested that stress-induced changes in the gut flora increase the likelihood of intestinal permeability, which in turn causes that local and systemic inflammation. So in other words, these guys were talking about gut dysbiosis, small intestine bacterial overgrowth, and intestinal permeability or leaky gut as drivers of inflammation and skin disorders more than 70 years before these conditions became widely known in medicine. And in fact, we might argue that these conditions are still not that widely known in medicine. As I'm sure many of you have experienced when you go in and talk to your doctor about leaky gut, they might look at you very strangely, or maybe even ask you not to come back. I think that's changing now because there's so much published literature on this condition, but it's really remarkable to me that these people, these physicians, had discovered this as far back as 1930. Now, Stokes and Pillsbury, I think, were men after Weston Price's own heart.
So I'm starting today by talking to you about what really is the greatest dietary disaster of all time. And I'm calling it sugar addiction, and I'll explain why over the next 2.5 hours. We're going to reserve at least 15 or 20 minutes at the end for questions and answers. So it might be there's a microphone, but you might also write them down and give them to the monitor if you like when that time comes. So let's begin with the question of why did Julia Ross become Cinderella in 1999? That was the year that my book, The Diet Cure, was first published. And 7 publishing houses bid for it. I got an enormous advance. I got numerous telephone calls from the publishers themselves with personal questions. The book immediately was tracked for New York Times bestseller status because it sold so well, so quickly, and continued to sell well in the United States and increasingly abroad in translation ever since it first came out in 1999. So needless to say, I had a lot of fun. I had a tremendous sense of satisfaction because I knew that the looming, burgeoning problems of overeating and overweight and the degenerative diseases that accompany these two increasing problems finally had a realistic, practical counterattack in this book. The reason that there was so much excitement about my book and why the publishers bid for it was that there had not been anything new in the world of weight loss since Atkins. And although Atkins, unlike the starvation options available, which were already proving themselves completely unsuccessful, recommended adequate calories and adequate fat and protein, there were some flaws in his plan that the diet cure actually corrected. So one day, 4 years later, I woke up writing my next book, The Mood Cure, and I had the same kind of experience. Everyone should be so fortunate as to have the head of the publishing house meditate and light candles every morning. My publisher is the largest publisher in the world, Penguin, and this woman is still doing it. And she had a vision that these books should be purchased by them. They outbid everyone else, and that they should promote them with everything they had, which is unusual for a publisher. I want to remind you, though, that in 1999 there was no obesity epidemic as far as we knew.